there was a very robust discussion last time on the same subject. So I really will focus on the specific impacts on Pakistan and how it's changing, and then we can unpack it a little bit. First of all, I think this whole China-India standoff is far more serious than it was initially assumed to be. By the middle of May, I remember looking at it and writing about it and was told, well, that's not a very serious, it will de-escalate. Well, even if it de-escalates, which to some extent it will, because China and India will be looking at a diplomatic management of containment of the fallout. China has actually gone quite far compared to Doklam and other times to suggest that it is seeing India in in an egregiously revisionist light. Now, what does that mean? At the heart of this conflict, I think I'm not going to tactically who went in first or what Daulat Beg Oldie Road was, or what happened in the Pangong area. We've reconstructed that to no end. What is at the core of this is, I think, to my mind, is obviously the Modi government's regime's expansionist behavior. And in this expansionism, it has not taken into account the fact that when it changed the status of, unilaterally changed the status of Jammu and Kashmir, this would make the whole dispute into not just a UN mandated dispute or internationally mandated dispute, and as the Simla Agreement says, between India and Pakistan, but also it has made China, obviously the Kashmiris are part of it, China into a player and stakeholder in the whole dispute. China is in here now since Ladakh was made into a union territory. Obviously, Aksai Chin is considered, it's claimed by China. It always has been. And for India to ride roughshod over that has obviously provoked a certain amount of, I would think, worry in China, and Beijing then obviously mobilized troops to that border when it saw activity on the particular road that we keep talking about, the Shai of Daulat Beg Oldie Road, particularly the infrastructure, the airbase, all of that. And we have a couple of weeks of literal fog of war, because no military equipment is allowed there, no arms are allowed there, given the sensitivity of the terrain and the fact that at least 23 points on that border, not the Galwan Valley only, but even outside the Galwan Valley, there are at least 23 points which are actually called areas of perceived gain. I mean, they are just, this is a perception-based border. Very little of it is demarcated really or on maps. And this is a problem. So yes, it can potentially become a serious flashpoint. And I think it has grown from a standoff to a flashpoint now. Particularly worrisome because it is at the confluence and intersect of borders. Certainly India and China are two nuclear powers, and they are both seeking to project power. They're both in a race for, in their view, regional hegemony. And Pakistan is, of course, at another restive border at the LOC. There's the LAC, the LOC, and all these three are nuclear countries which are not necessarily with India in the middle. India is not at peace with any of them. So that's, I think, very important to understand why this can be seen as a great game situation, and why great powers would move into this area, because, or look into moving and perhaps even interceding. And President Trump's offer, he's made 3 offers since Bill Clinton, to intercede in Kashmir, and that was met with a big chill from both sides, India and China, and you all saw that. So where do we go from here? And let me just quickly talk about how Pakistan could be impacted. And I would not, of course, be sanguine at all about how Pakistan could be impacted. While India and China would be seeking to de-escalate at some point, I think a certain Rubicon has been crossed strategically. And there's no going back. Now, Modi is under pressure in New Delhi and from his opposition in the Lok Sabha to very clearly state why this has happened. Was India's security establishment asleep at the wheel? All of the opposition demands why there's been a reputational loss. There's been a huge reputational loss to India and a concomitant loss to Modi's strongman posture within the country, particularly because, of course, as you know, the confusion about what happened on June 15th, he has not been able to explain. He keeps saying, well, our soldiers didn't die. We didn't lose any soldiers to the Chinese, or they were they were in our side, or we were in their side. The Indian soldiers, what were they then doing in the Chinese side? He said they ingress, and then he obviously said that Galwan Valley is what it is. So there's clearly been a conceding of space, both strategic and perceptional and reputational. I can't even speak to the territorial implications of this, because this is a region where both sides have been claiming territory and sovereignty for a long time, since 1962. So no one can really say who moved in where. This is a perceived area of perceived demarcations or non-demarcations. So this is one of the problems. It will then remain potentially unstable. Both sides are moving much larger contingents of military into the area. And right now, while India politically has ceded ground and there's a little bit of underplay, there was in the media, in sharp contrast to how Pakistan is spoken about in the Indian media. And that's actually what alerted many of us to the implications for Pakistan. So what are we looking at? We're looking at Modi going into a November election, state election in Bihar. We're looking at him losing reputationally, which to him, domestic internal posturing is extremely important. He is seeing this, what India calls a bilateral issue, turning it into a trilateral or possibly quadrilateral issue. And there is a fair amount of consternation. Now, what are the threats to Pakistan? I believe they're literally 10, and we should not be sanguine. And I just want to do a quick readout of what the Indians have been talking about. Look at what they've been saying. Since the controversial measures taken in Kashmir last year, since August, India's politicians have systematically upped the bilateral ante with Pakistan in Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, and they continue to do so. Instead of closing, for instance, the number one, the embassy, you think that the embassy in Beijing would be halved. No, because that is where India cannot retort or take proportionate actions. It is deflecting in Pakistan, which we can all see. The halving of the diplomatic missions was the first one, and it happened suddenly from New Delhi with no obvious provocation from Pakistan. So that's one. And listen to what they've been saying. Earlier this year, India's new army chief said that the Indian army was ready to seize control, quote unquote, ready to seize control of Pakistani territory if directed by the Indian government. So that's military posturing. Fine. Then they go on to say that the same month, Narendra Modi says India only needs 7 to 10 days to defeat Pakistan. Okay, in a war. And you can say that that was also posturing. Then, of course, and there's a lot of posturing that goes on between the two countries, we all know. But just a fortnight ago, India's defense minister reiterated that taking Pakistani Kashmir was now a quote unquote stated goal of India's parliament. This is a very big statement to make. It is existential at every level. And normally we would put down such statements, and they've made them in the past. But this is a beast that is provoked, it is bleeding, and it wants to hit back somewhere else. It wants to hit back to on a border that feels it feels it is less vulnerable. So here we have, what do we see? We first see India having its diplomatic commission in Pakistan, and then asking Pakistan, of, obviously before that, to vacate its own position there. So 50-50. No having in Beijing, which is where they've had the conflict. So that is my one point. Secondly, if you noticed, Indian positions in their part of held Kashmir are already changing. Any artillery mapping will tell you that they're digging in stakes for long range firing into Pakistan. And thirdly, the LOC has been active, the line of control has been active constantly, which has been a case for since 2017. And from January 1st, we've seen belligerents, we've seen 1,404 cases of ceasefire violations, which our military tell us is unprovoked. We see crossings into the working boundary, which on the plains of the Punjab, where there can be no question of cross-border movement because it's all visible. There's no mountainous terrain. And innocent civilians have given their lives, over 59 just last year. That includes women and children. But humanitarian concerns are not of interest to the Modi regime. They feel that they're not answerable either internationally or multilaterally. And you also see, fourth, you see the Indian Met Department, the Meteorological Department, now forecasting weather for both Muzaffarabad and Skardu. This has never happened before. It has happened for the last week or so, and they are now moving to sort of make the predictions within it's seen as part of the Indian Union. That is the new narrative content. Now, if you ask yourself, fifthly, what are the impacts further militarily this can have? I mean, the generals are better placed to answer that, but we all know 2/3 of India's strike corps and battalions are faced off still against Pakistan, not against China, not against China, and this is very important. They're still faced off, and there's no change in that, and they feel that they can certainly move forward tactically in every which way. Fifthly, they can also certainly aggressively start imposing a sea denial in the Indian Ocean. It's very much their literal that they use. And with a fair amount of aggression, I think will also come, will also be upgraded into the, the Western Pacific and the South China Sea, which is very tense in any case with China over there. And they will, I think, be looking at the Malacca Strait to try and disable China's movement as well, and build up the Quad front, the Japan, Vietnam, Australia, Indonesia ties. Now, obviously, sixthly, the important thing is that this is not, somebody scoffed this morning on Twitter or somewhere, but oh, this is a joke, the Indian military, Indian Navy to try to stand off or run interference against China. That's ridiculous. Well, they will certainly be looking at that because you already have Mike Pompeo saying, worryingly, that we up at a Brussels online forum that we are pulling out from Germany. We're pulling out troops from Germany, principally because China is, he didn't say that, but China is primarily a land power. And we're pulling out troops from Germany so that we can posture appropriately to meet new challenges in other theaters. And he also said that China is an aggressor in the South China Sea and in the Western Pacific. There is also great resentment about the BRI and the CPEC in all of this geopolitical context. And there is worry that with Gwadar opening up even better, this makes China a two-ocean power, which has a strong reputational, intellectual, and obviously geopolitical and trade impact for China and for the whole of the Eurasian region. So these 5-6 things are already in play. Seventh, I think, given Modi's record, Pakistan needs not to be sanguine. We need to worry about what damming is happening of our water. He's been known to weaponize water before and could literally resort to that again, because frankly, Pakistan India is a conflict that never fails to ignite passions on his media airwaves. It becomes Fox on steroids the minute Pakistan comes up. That is not the case with China. The whole conversation for the last 2 months from India has been, by and large, obviously there are exceptions, has been very studied, very measured, and looking at uh, where India can diplomatically manage this. There's a restraint in the tone, and there's an urging of restraint even elsewhere by government. So, can they go into a two-front war? Is the issue here. And lastly, I want to say that obviously, uh, India still has a very strong ally, also neuralgic about the China-Pakistan sort of nexus, if you like, or partnership, whereas it doesn't have to be zero sum, but there is a neuralgia, it is growing, and they see China as flexing muscle, whereas Indian expansionism is is what triggers this. The same is happening in Nepal. The same is, I mean, Bhutan really can't say much. They're not even allowed to open an embassy by Delhi in China. So they're completely in there. Bangladesh is being booed by China. There are things happening in India's neighborhood that it has not taken account of. And lastly, I mean, obviously, trade action is always something that can be taken, but India-Pakistan trade has never come anywhere close to optimistic estimates by the World Bank of 200 billion, etc. It's just sitting at 37, uh, roughly 37 billion dollars, and it's not very much. Um, Eighth point, I think that they can look at airspace, which is already after Corona, after the COVID threat. Right now, it's already closed, but that's always been a weapon used between the two countries. And there is, of course, the obvious thing in the room, the big elephant in the room, the 10th point. What is it? It is the constant search for um, changing not just the public conversation, but moving past the memory of Balakot and Pulwama, which has given India a lot to think about in terms of Pakistan's conventional capabilities. And therefore, tenthly, I'm just going to say, with that memory in mind, they have an incentive, if you like, to beef up in their own political incentive to stand up to to Pakistan, which is neither threatening them or competing. It is for Pakistan, it is not about competition or religion or even gaining territory. It's a question of survival, frankly, in terms of where our GDPs stand. And they've made that very clear. So, surgical strikes, false flag operations, something that governments have been talking about repeatedly, are a very real tactical and strategic possibility. And Pakistan will have to be very clear that, lastly, at international forums, that other than this kind of potential attack or incursion, which we saw in Balakot after 1971, that was the first time Pakistan saw an Indian incursion into its own airspace. The last point will be, of course, international forums. Pakistan has FATF reviews coming up in October again. It's been put off because of COVID, and India has serious lobbying power there, of course, with the United States at its side in lockstep. And of course, we have the United Nations, where it has gained a seat at the Security Council, which Pakistan did not lobby against as per tradition of how these regional blocs go. So having said that, I think I've run well over the time. I was told initially 15, so I think I'm within 15 minutes here on the potential threats and implications for China, for rather Pakistan. Uh, I also want to add that India has not forgotten, it will not forget, given its rising nationalism or rather ultra nationalism, this particular regime will not forget that it has taken a bloody nose, if you like. I don't want to use such language, but there it is. And even with China, it will go into a medium-term search for resetting the balance. That it will do first immediately in the Indian Ocean and, of course, the Western Pacific. It can threaten Chinese shipping. It can start aggressively, as I said, imposing sea denial there. It can upgrade ties with the Quad and other allies. And it will obviously look to change India's neutral status in the South China Sea. All this will have its impact on Pakistan. It may even seek it may even seek a security umbrella with the United States and the Quad, because this is a threat unlike anything India has seen for a long time, and it is now feeling the pinch. It wants to inflict pain on one border or the other. It has to lash out. Modi has to deflect the public conversation, and he's doing it. And this will escalate for Pakistan, I feel, both economically, militarily, and at strategically and at multilateral and international forums. India will play, and in the, of course, ocean, in the Indian Ocean, India will play all the cards it has while having to hold back against the military that is 5 times larger than it, which is China, or the GDP that is 4 times larger than this. We can talk about boycotts or potential issues later. Thank you. I hope that worked.
No, that's fantastic, Sherry. Thank you so much for that really comprehensive and quick summary of what's been happening. There's a number of questions that have come up. I wanted to start by asking one myself, which is really what Pakistan's official positioning and posture right now should be. You would have seen the news of the indication that Pakistan is open to reopening Kartarpur Sahib in time for a major event that is supposedly on the 29th of June, which is not far away. Not necessarily your comment on that potential opening, but more widely, how should Pakistan engage with India, particularly in this moment?
So thank you, Musharraf. I think many of us feel that this whole standoff and this whole conflict has great costs for Pakistan, which 10 of which I outlined here. So it has great costs for Pakistan. The potential isolation, etc., that India will try to impose are very real. And Pakistan already, despite pursuing a very tough peace agreement with the Taliban and in full support of American goals and outcomes, will still, I feel, face vilification on both ends. On the return of the terrorism conversation, where you see a return of the terrorism conversation at a global level, and therefore at multilateral, that Pakistan is still pursuing or using proxies or terrorism to further its goals. It's what it can't with its own formal military, so it's furthering those goals. So that conversation will obviously, I think, make a comeback, and Pakistan has to make a very clear, and we are seeing it coming back. Pakistan has to make it very clear that it stands for peace in the region, for normalization of ties between all the countries, the 3 nuclear countries, with a fair arsenal and an ability to inflict both military and economic pain. Instead of COVID, which we should all be actually battling together, given our water basins being joined, our air quality being shared, and many other things, we will see, I think, a growing distancing with neighbors next door. And Pakistan will have to say that while we stand for peace and stability, and we see the cost of posturing, obviously we are in a place where we have a nuclear deterrent, and sometimes I shudder to think what could happen without that, because with the growing multipolarity you see in the world, and with America's diminishing role in international organizations and multilateral placement, if you like, there's no Pax Americana anymore. And while that is happening, multipolarity is always more unstable than bipolar, like two poles like Russia and the Soviet Union, or even one hegemon globe. So we're going towards that dangerous place, and Pakistan is going to have to protect itself by projecting its own narrative far more aggressively and safeguarding its interests, its potential outcomes, much better than it has. Pakistan maintained a studied silence through this whole episode without looking at what potential impacts this could have. I'm not suggesting analysis become a tool of public diplomacy, but certainly, Pakistan should have been staking its own position. It should have been saying that, look, India has has become the revisionist power. It is not the status quo power. India always called Pakistan the revisionist power. It is India which is now flexing muscle everywhere, and it is causing tectonic plates in a very, very tough region to change. And I didn't hear much of this. There was talk about false flags being expected. Okay, that's really a military projection, and it must be made because you're already stating what you see on the ground. Uh, but there has to be a broader embrace and understanding projected to people, to parliament, on public. It's not enough for a foreign office spokeswoman to be speaking at Pakistani positions. This must happen at the highest level.
So, I mean, Sherry, I think that's a really good segue into a question that's come up by former Air Chief Marshal Faiz Ahmed, who thinks very thoughtfully and in a very sort of calm and
Yeah.
I think a professional manner about these issues. And he asks a question that I think a lot of us are asking, which is, you know, the viewpoint that there should be a trilateral engagement around what happened after August 5th, because really, in a sense, what we've seen right now is a product of the August 5th attempted annexation of occupied Kashmir. Uh, how do you respond to the idea of a legal and diplomatic trilateral engagement with China, India, and Pakistan around Kashmir?
I think it's something that we should be looking at, which is why I said it's already a trilateral, it's been trilateralized. And it would be in Pakistan's interest to have at least an aspiring, another regional hegemon in the room in any kind of formal conversation on this. So I don't think there's any disadvantage to Pakistan. And also, I think Pakistan should be at this point making a very big public stated pledge to protect its line of control, and of course the working boundary, which often comes under attack, to revive. And there was a blip in the middle where this was said, but then it died down as part of our very kind of diffused public diplomacy or state diplomacy. We'll be asking for UNMOGIP, the UN observer, military observer group, at international forums to be operationalized, because these are three unstable LOCs, a disputed border. LAC is a very differently perceived border, and these are fault lines that could pose a great deal of risk, not just to the region, but to Asia and the world. I think Kashmir still lies, the larger territory of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir still lies at the heart of this conversation, which is, by the way, being completely erased out of the public conversation in India. It's absolutely not being discussed. A few conscientious observers are saying, well, let's not be amnesiac about this. This may have to do with the domicile changes you're trying to make in Jammu and Kashmir. This may have to do with what we did on the 5th of August. But it meets with very little play there. We have to make sure this conversation goes forward. And for China to be in part of the room is absolutely, there shouldn't be a disadvantage at all. Aksai Chin is something that they have been emotionally, and obviously Tibet, very involved with. And they claim sovereignty over. They've never given sovereignty up over that.
Yeah. Look, Sherry, I mean, this obviously we could go for hours, I think, just with you, but we have to move to the panel. Before I let you go, Madam Sherry Rahman, one final question that if we could get a quick answer to, because I think it's an important one. You know, there's been hints, and I think you've been very measured, and I am really grateful for that. But obviously you're a member of the opposition, and you have legitimate concerns about the way in which this government has handled things. Marine Kashif is asking, what will it take for Pakistan's political parties to unite on issues? We don't get to see that kind of situational maturity from any leading party. Now, I don't know if I agree with the last bit of that, but it's not me that's answering the questions.
I understand.
So what's the solution to this issue?
Yeah, in the interest of not being divisive in this kind of seminar and interaction, I'll just say, look, one thing: Kashmir and COVID, 1K, 1C, both are issues that Pakistan has, all political parties in Pakistan, and this includes the ruling party, all political parties have, without asking, been willing and able to come to the table to give a unified message to both the rest of the country and the rest of the world that we have no compromise on any discussion or any bargains on Kashmir. Whatever we do as a nation. There is no division here on that at all. So yes, we did ask for a joint session when August 5th happened, but it was the opposition that sought it. We looked for a briefing, which is the norm in such national security crises in Parliament and outside Parliament House. They usually happen at PM House, where heads of parties come in and they share a briefing also with the military. And everybody then comes up with a joint political and national security statement, as you know, a resolution, if you like, that then is transmitted to the rest of the world. This did not happen. We waited far and wide for that APC. We went to one with Nawaz Sharif. They came to ours. Despite severe political differences, Kashmir is one issue we don't stand on ceremony for. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister chose not to attend that meeting while staying 2 rooms away. While we waited for him 2 hours, all the political leadership, at least 40 people in the room, and then it was the army chief who had to sit on the side and give his briefing, and that's how the meeting concluded. So that's all I'm going to really say. The political parties are all on one table. Unfortunately, the government isn't making sure we're on that table. This is not a time to divide. It is a time to unite Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Sherry Rahman, President of Jinnah Institute, a vital member of the Senate of Pakistan, senior leader of the PPP, chairperson of the CPEC committee in our parliament. I'm grateful, one, to Asfar Ehsan and CPG for creating this opportunity for all of us, and to you, Madam Sherry Rahman, for making yourself available. At this time, we'll end the keynote session and we'll zoom right into the panel discussion. I'm going to ask